Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm excited to have Mr. John Pitts, who's with Plaid. I'll give him a second to introduce himself in just a minute. But as usual, if you're listening and you can give me a thumbs up just to let me know, you can hear us and everything's working well, I would be grateful. I'm sure it is. I know it takes a second to get the thumbs up. So while we're waiting for that, John, take a few seconds to tell folks who you are, what you do at Plaid. I think you were at the CFPB before that, right?
I was, Rob,
Yeah.
and thanks for having me on. So my name is John Pitts. I'm the head of industry relations and digital trust at Plaid. My job is to basically work with banks, fintechs, other organizations like NACHA, the clearinghouse, to make open banking, sort of connected financial services data systems safer and more efficient for consumers. So quick 101 on Plaid for those who don't know us. We've been around for a little bit over 13 years. We do a lot of the connectivity for the apps that are really popular, but not just apps, banks as well, because a lot of banks leverage this technology. Currently, we connect to a little bit over 10,000 financial institutions and power 7,000 apps. So I know you're a fan of Monarch Money and a couple of other apps.
Yep.
We are probably running a lot of the connectivity for the apps you use for budgeting, payments, lending, a lot of use cases that are popular today.
Okay, that's great. I want to dive into security, which is where we're going to spend 99% of our time today.
Perfect.
But you mentioned a term that I want to just touch on. That's open banking.
Yeah.
What is that?
So before I get into that really quickly, anytime you or any of your viewers, if I use an acronym or a term that is unclear, like absolutely interrupt me, make me go back, make me explain it, because I don't want this to be too wonky and technical. So open banking is the idea that a consumer owns their financial data and has the right to share it from wherever it sits to a different company in order to get a product or service. So let me give you the easiest example of this. You have a bank account at a large bank. You have a lot of transactions from your cards or your checks that you make with that account. Each of those transactions is a little piece of information about your financial life. And open banking says, yes, you can have that at your bank. But if, for example, you want to use a budgeting app, you have the right to share it with that budgeting app, and no one can prevent you from moving your data to where you want it to go.
And again, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but I think the CFPB issued I guess it's a proposed rule, maybe. I'm not sure where it stands, but it was last year. That's still not law yet, or is it?
So it is law. It's actually a
Okay.
final rule that came out in October of last year. Now, there's litigation. Some of the large banks have actually sued to try and undo that rule. So there's some uncertainty. And actually, this
Okay.
week, we're expecting the CFPB to start a revised rulemaking process
Yeah.
to change the final rule. But in general, what you can expect is almost everywhere in the US, banks and Plaid have facilitated open banking in practice, even if not open banking sort of under regulation and under
Okay.
law. 1 in 2 Americans right now are using some form of open banking with Plaid, where they're using us to help share their data across a network.
Okay, great. So I want to dive in. This is the question I've been wanting to ask someone
Of
at
course.
one of the account aggregators for like 5 years. I've got an app, well, Monarch Money.
Yeah.
I'm going to connect my Vanguard account. A box pops up and it says, give me the keys to your castle. I want your
Yeah.
username and your password.
Yep.
Walk us through how that works and what happens with those login credentials.
So there's 2 things that might be happening depending on where you're trying to share your data from. And I think it's important to understand both of those. In 80% of instances, actually not sharing your logon credentials with anyone. You're not sharing them with Plaid, you're not sharing them with Monarch. You're using something called an API, which is short for an application programming interface. It's where the bank has actually built a way for you to be redirected from the app to the bank. You'll actually see a screen pop up. That's a bank screen, and you're giving your logon credentials to your own bank or to Vanguard. They then issue a secure token to the app, and the app can use that basically to knock on the bank's API and retrieve the data. So that's 80% of cases today. That's what's happening, at least on the Plaid network. In the other 20% of cases, we actually capture your account and routing number. We encrypt them and store them on our system. And whenever we need to access that data in order to power the app you're using and share the data with the app, we'll go to the bank's normal logon screen, input the username and password, retrieve the data from the account, and send it on to the app.
Now, I do want to get a little technical here for just a minute. And so back in the olden days, like 5 years ago, right?
Yep.
Or maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the technology was basically scraping the screen.
Yes.
Right. So in that case, I think as you've described it, Plaid would actually save our username and password on Plaid servers. It'd be encrypted, right? And it's encrypted end to end, even during transit. In other words, during the time I'm sending Plaid that information, it's encrypted, right?
Encrypted in transit, encrypted at rest.
At rest, meaning sitting on Plaid servers.
Correct.
Okay. But you would then, you being Plaid, would use that encrypted username and password to log in, see whatever, my account balance, my transactions on the screen, and literally scrape them, or pull, because it's basically HTML. You can pull that data, send it to whatever app I've asked you to send it to. So question one is, are there some financial institutions where Plaid and perhaps some of the other aggregators still use screen scraping because it's the only available way to do it?
That's exactly right. So the only problem with APIs, and by the way, we vastly prefer APIs. They're not only safer, they're actually easier, more efficient, faster. You get more access to your data better. The difficulty with APIs is that we can't build them. So each bank needs to build their own API. There are roughly 10 to 12,000 banks in the US, depending on how you count the credit unions and some non-bank financial institutions that feel a lot like banks, like Chime for a consumer feels like a bank, not technically a bank. If they don't build an API, the only way for a consumer to access their data is with this screen scraping technology. And you're absolutely right. 7 years ago, the market was 100% screen scraping. In those 7 years, we've moved from 100% screen scraping to a little bit closer to 20% screen scraping. There's also been a nice acceleration of that transition through the creation of the Financial Data Exchange. This is a nonprofit organization, Plaid's on the board, along with some of the largest banks in the country and some other data aggregators. And that's creating a standard API. The value of that standard API is for smaller banks. They don't have to build something new. They can just take this off the shelf and implement it themselves. And so we've seen a rapid transition from screen scraping to API, but today there's still about 20% of traffic that's on screen scraping.
So let's talk about the other 80%. As you said, that's API, just an interface between Plaid and the bank, or the budgeting app and the bank. Maybe we'll talk about the specifics, but am I correct? So I've read about OAuth, open authorization. So you can use an API interface with a bank without open authorization, right?
Yes.
And you can use it with open authorization.
That's right.
All right. Now, am I correct that if let's take the scenario where you're not using OAuth, you're not using open authorization, you have this API though that you can use that the bank or broker has developed. In that scenario, is Plaid still having to save the username and password?
We're not. So it depends on the exact type of the connection, but most of those API connections are OAuth. There are other authentication protocols that you can use that are not OAuth that allow us to swap those credentials for an API token. Once we do that, we purge the credentials and just use that API token from then on.
And that's really what I was getting at. Once you no longer need a login and password, Plaid has internal procedures to delete that information from your servers?
Yes, we do.
And that can be in the case where, let's say you've got an institution that you had to scrape their screen, but they then now developed an API 6 months ago, and you no longer need to do that. Does Plaid have a process where we say, okay, well, we can delete that user information. We don't need it anymore?
I'm laughing, Rob, because not only do we have a process, but it is like an incredibly convoluted and carefully orchestrated process between us and our bank partner. We call it migration, where we sometimes need to take 30, 40, 50 million customers of that institution and not only move them over to the API, but do it so that they don't lose connectivity to their apps. None of their data gets deleted from the apps, and you're able to sort of make that seamless technological transition without being impacted. Part of that migration is the purge of all of the credentials that we've ever used for that so that we can switch it to the API token, followed by, in most cases, a legal attestation that all of that purging has happened so that we and the bank both know we no longer have held away credentials and we're only using the API tokens for access from that point
So
on.
that legal notice, is that something that you give to the financial institution that says,
It
hey,
is.
we've deleted all of your customers' login information or whatever, something to that effect?
That's right.
Okay. So so with OAuth, am I correct then that with OAuth, you Plaid never actually even get the user logins?
That's correct. You'll actually see an interstitial screen where you'll see the Plaid screen where you select your institution and then you get redirected without leaving the connection experience to a
Yeah.
bank logon page.
I smile with what was that word again? Interstitial?
Interstitial,
So
yeah.
a pop-up. A
Yes,
pop-up.
a
Okay.
pop-up, yeah.
So that was kind of my next question. As a user, how can I know which method's being used? If I see a pop-up that says that's got a URL for Vanguard, as an
Yep.
example, that tells me that Plaid will never ever see or save or have any access to my login credentials.
That's correct. And you'll also actually, in that flow, see something saying you are being redirected to the property of that financial institution, the digital property of that financial institution, so you can be confident that you're not sharing your credentials with anyone other than your FI.
Okay. Now, for that 20%, so am I correct then? 20% is still screen scraping.
That's right.
The other 80%, am I correct that you Plaid either never sees the login information or you get it encrypted temporarily so that you can get a token and then the login information is deleted?
That's right. And by that temporary, we're talking about amount of time measured in milliseconds, maybe
Okay.
seconds, but no longer than that.
Oh, really? So, okay.
Oh, it's a very quick back-end handshake to swap the credentials for the token because the goal is for that connectivity to work extremely quickly.
I'm wondering if the 20% of institutions that don't have an API you can use, I'm guessing these are small local institutions that don't feel they have a need or a significant customer base or the finances to build this.
It's actually slightly surprising. You would think that sort of off the cuff, but actually the majority of community banks and credit unions either are on API already or are API ready through their core service provider. So not to get unduly technical here, but a lot of small institutions don't build their own websites, don't build their own back office servers, other things. They rely on companies like Jack Henry, FIS, Fiserv, who build that technology for a lot of different banks and run their core systems. So those core processors or digital banking platforms have actually built APIs for the majority of their customers. Some of them, they switch them over to API right away. Some of them, the bank needs to ask to move over to the API connectivity. So there's a couple thousand who are on those systems who are slowly migrating over. The place where there's a gap is actually the largest banks built all of this themselves. The smallest banks and credit unions had it built for them by their core providers. It's in the middle with like the regional banks who still operate their own technology, but have not actually made the investment to switch to API. That's where you're most likely to have a screen scraping connection today.
Interesting. Okay. So has Plaid ever had a situation where login credentials, even encrypted as they are, were hacked, were stolen?
We have not had a breach like that now.
You mentioned that with some of them, you for that millisecond you hold the credentials and then it gets swapped out for a token.
Yes.
If a hacker were to, or an evil Plaid employee, I'm sure there are none that exist. We'll say an evil Yodlee employee, if you prefer.
I do not prefer. I prefer to say there are good actors at all of these companies,
Okay.
even if they are competitors of
Yeah.
ours.
Yeah. If they stole the token, They have the token now. What can they do with it?
So they actually can't do very much with it because there's token security that goes on top of that token itself that requires you to authenticate not just with the token, but the entity that is using the token. So there's multiple layers of token security, including through, these are developed by other international organizations. It's the same API token security that gets used for APIs across the tech world. That is how most of tech operates, from Google to Meta, is on these tokens. And there's well-established security protocols for how to make sure that those tokens can't be used except by the entity who's the token client.
So we connect with Vanguard. I'm going to download some data to Monarch. Does the data go from Vanguard to Monarch, or does it go from Vanguard to Plaid to Monarch, or maybe somewhere else?
Vanguard to Plaid to Monarch. And there's a couple of really important reasons for that. The single most important reason from a user experience perspective is for something that we call transaction cleansing. So you would think that, like, everyone, if you buy a coffee at Starbucks, it shows up in your account the same way, regardless of where you bank. That's not true. Depending on the financial institution, your transactions may be categorized differently. They may be listed differently. One might say Starbucks, one might say STBKS. When you see that show up in Monarch, especially if you're connecting multiple accounts, you want every Starbucks transaction to look like a Starbucks transaction. So as it goes through Plaid, one of the services we provide is to normalize all of that data across multiple financial institutions so that it shows up the same way. The other thing we do is we add a layer of security as the data goes through. So some of that is data minimization. That might be if a customer of ours, so an app, is requesting data and we have reviewed their use case and the data they are requesting exceeds what is necessary for their use case. We will actually prevent them from accessing that data, so that they can't get more than you have permissioned to them or permissioned for their use. The other thing we do is make sure that you have not been the victim of an account takeover. So one of the things that might happen outside of Plaid is someone might hack your account at your app, and they might then be trying to move data or move money that is not actually with your consent. And we can see evidence in the data patterns that would let us know whether it looked like you had been the victim of an account takeover. So that might be like the SIM on your mobile phone had been swapped for a different SIM. Your IP address had changed. There was new account opening activity in the account that we can see, or in the app that we can see. And so we collect that data to make sure that we can scan it for those patterns to identify potential fraud and block those uses if we think there's a fraudulent account takeover attempt.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty important, because although we're talking about apps that wouldn't involve actually making transfers, some apps connect with Plaid that do, like Venmo.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So this data then flows through Plaid and then onto the app. Does Plaid keep any of that financial data on their servers?
We do store some of it on our servers. Part of that is for the anti-fraud use case, but there's another reason we do it, which is to manage load for the overall ecosystem. So the main reason we would store is someone like you, who I think we would consider a super user, and I imagine we would consider a lot of your audience to be super users. They may have 4 or 5 financial apps that they're running at any given time, right? They'll have Monarch and Rocket Money and YNAB, You Need a Budget. All of those require the same data. We actually try and reduce cost in the ecosystem so that, let's say, all 3 of those apps need your transactions once a day. We don't want to send 3 API calls to your banks to get the same data 3 times. So we'll retrieve the data, store it on our system, and then as each app requires it, we'll actually just have them do an API call to us rather than a redundant API call to the financial institution.
How long is that data stored on Plaid servers?
So it depends on the use case. For some use cases, it's stored as long as the consumer is still using the app, just so there is a backup in case they ever lose connectivity. Money movement is one of those cases where, for account authentication, a user's account and routing number or tokenized account number increasingly. If there's ever a connection break, we want to be able to reestablish that connection so the consumer never misses a payment with that app when they're expecting the payment to go through.
And of course, I assume all of that's encrypted end to end.
Encrypted end to end and encrypted at rest.
So do you have access to, like, going back to the Vanguard example, would Vanguard send you, among other things, the full account number?
So it depends on the financial institution. There are 3 different versions that we do depending on the use case, and we do whatever we can to make sure that the use case is tied and risk managed so that we're minimizing data wherever possible. The first would be the full account and routing number. The use case, just so you understand that, for that is when someone wants to move money me to me from one of their accounts to another account, they need to authenticate that they are in control of that originating account. And this is under the NACHA rules for money movement using the ACH system, which is how most money moves from account to account. There you use the account and routing number and the fact that you have demonstrated access to that account by sharing your username and password with the bank to authenticate your control over that account. It basically replaces, if you remember, micro deposits. That used to be how we would authenticate accounts. So this replaces that, and you need the full account and routing number in order to then make that money movement and move the funds from, let's say, your Chase account to your Coinbase account. I know you don't invest in crypto, but for people who are investing in crypto, that's how
I do have a Coinbase account. It's just empty.
Okay. Yeah. So you've probably done a Plaid authentication in order to connect your Coinbase account to your other accounts. The other one is a masked account and routing number. Sometime we will get just the masked account and routing number where you will show the final 4 digits, and we will just display that. That's usually for account selection. So if you have a financial institution where you have 4 or 5 accounts, maybe a checking account, a savings account, you want to know which account you're connecting to that app, because you may only want to connect one of the 4 or 5 accounts you have at that institution to the app. And so we'll just retrieve the last 4 digits so that we can redisplay that to the consumer and let them pick. The one that's I think, most interesting and most exciting is tokenized account and routing numbers. Now, there's 2 banks that have this set up right now. That is PNC and JP Morgan Chase. They will actually never share an account and routing number with Plaid or with an app. They will substitute it for a tokenized number that is specific to that app. That tokenized number works for money movement. But if, for example, there was ever a breach and that tokenized number was disclosed to a bad actor or hacked by a bad actor, the bank is able to deactivate that tokenized account and routing number without deactivating all of your other accounts, because it's specific to just that one app. Very similar to how credit cards work with tokenized numbers now, or virtual PIN numbers. We work with the clearinghouse, who has developed a tokenized account number system that they are rolling out to other banks. So just as we've had this transition from screen scraping to APIs, we're in the very early days of a transition that will hopefully end with no one ever sharing a raw account and routing number, just using tokenized numbers from now on. Yeah. That will probably take a couple of years to play out, though.
Okay. Earlier, did you use the term NACHA rules?
NACHA rules, yes. These are not the rules for putting melted cheese on chips. NACHA is the National Automatic Clearinghouse Association. So if you think about moving money between bank accounts, usually that's through the Automatic Clearinghouse. That's a technology that was developed in the 70s jointly by the Federal Reserve and the Clearinghouse. Most money movement moves over that. It is starting to be replaced by 2 real-time money movement rails, RTP, which stands for real-time payments. That's a system used by the clearinghouse, and FedNow, which is a real-time money movement system used by the Federal Reserve. Both are new within the last couple of years, and they're slowly starting to take market share from ACH, but NACHA is the organization that sets the rules for ACH payments.
Okay, so if we're talking about a budgeting app or some other app that doesn't involve transferring money from one account to another, am I correct then that the full account number would not be part of the data? It would be
correct.
masked? Okay.
Yeah.
And then, are you aware of any situation where a bad actor has been able to steal money out of an account solely because an individual connected an app to a financial institution? Has that ever happened in the industry?
So I am not aware of any of those, but I can't say definitively that it's never happened because I don't
Yeah.
know what's happened at other competitors or other organizations. I will say that unfortunately, the leading type of fraud that we see is actually me to me or friendly fraud. And that is where a consumer will initiate a transaction and then say, actually, I didn't do that. I want my money back. A little bit like people ordering a package from Amazon and saying it never got delivered. That's the most common type of fraud we hear about and work with banks to investigate, is that type of fraud, not bad actor account takeover fraud.
So a fraudulent fraud.
Yes, a consumer defrauding their own financial institution while claiming that someone else has defrauded them. Yes.
Yeah, I have a friend, former colleague of mine at the law firm I used to work at, who's now an arbitrator, and he does some arbitration in this area. But he sees it where people hijack your phone, and then use the two-factor authentication that sometimes comes through a text message to get access to an account. Have you had any experience with that kind of fraud?
Yeah, so we block a huge amount of that fraud, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I said SIM swaps or new device or location stuff. Often, when someone does that type of takeover attempt, they're either swapping the SIM card or they are pinging from an IP address that does not match that consumer's typical IP address over the mobile networks, and we have checks for all of those things to prevent them.
I know we're coming to the end of the half hour I promised you. I just have a couple more. I don't know how much time you have. Does Plaid sell or share data, user data, with anybody?
We do not sell data, no. So everything is with consumer consent, and we do not use the data beyond what the consumer specifically consents to, both for the app use case and for the anti-fraud and other use cases that we do at the network level.
Okay. Just thinking practical, maybe you could give folks tips on what they can do to protect themselves, whether it's maybe you could start with what they should do to protect themselves when linking accounts with apps.
Yep.
And then even broader, if you have other tips or things that you've found that protect folks.
So 2 tips that I think are the most important. One, it is better to connect via API. And if you've got the choice of multiple accounts that you want to be your primary account for connecting to apps, selecting one where your institution has an API in place is generally a good idea. The other one, though, is doing a little bit of a data sharing health checkup, which I recommend people do on a regular basis. So we have a website, my.plaid.com, where you can actually go in and you can see real time every app and every financial institution that you've connected with Plaid. You can see what data you are sharing with each of those apps and what they are using it for. And with 1 or 2 clicks, you can either tell the app to stop sharing your data or receiving your data, or instruct Plaid to delete all of your data that we've got on you. You want to be careful with those data deletions because you don't want to break any use cases that you've got running. But that checkup, seeing where your connectivity is, making sure that all of it is something that you want, that the app is still something that you're using, is very important. And I think it's a good sort of, just like you do financial hygiene, doing financial data hygiene on a regular basis is something I recommend to everyone.
Yeah, so I've used Plaid's portal that folks can use that shows all of the connections. And you can disengage, you can delete them, whatever you want. And again, to know whether an institution is using the API, we would see a pop-up with that institution's URL, usually their branding, right?
That's right.
If it's screen scraping, I assume we're entering our credentials in a Plaid pop-up or screen.
That's right.
And is that really the only way to know ahead of time? There's not like a list somewhere?
There's unfortunately not a list somewhere. I wish there was. And the one of the great things about the 1033 rule, if it survives, is it actually mandates that every financial institution build an API, which would help get us to a API only world very quickly.
And that's the CFPB's rule you're referring
to. That's the CFPB's rule, yes.
You've been helpful. Just, I promise, one last question. any red flags consumers should be, looking for that maybe their account's been compromised?
Yeah. So any transaction that you don't expect, if you use the Plaid portal, you actually can get an alert if a device that you're not expecting or that we're not expecting connects to your account. That's a very important red flag. The other one is new account openings that you have not, that you don't remember. And one of the things you can do within Plaid is sign up for a profile with Plaid, where we will alert you to every new account opening that we see on our network, as a good way of making sure that that's expected behavior and that you're the one doing it. I highly recommend consumers signing up for that direct account with Plaid so that you can use Portal more effectively, but also so that you can get those push notifications of any fraudulent behavior that we might be seeing that you should check up on.
Wonderful. Well, John, I appreciate your time. I'm going to stay on the live show for just a bit, but I wanted to thank you. I really appreciate this, and Plaid for taking the time to talk with us. And thank you.
Thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of your show.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. I just wanted to stay on for a quick second. I did a lot of research before I did this interview. And by the way, if you wanted me to ask a question that I didn't get to, I apologize. I know there's more I could have covered. And it's hard to actually keep track of the chat and actually talk to someone. But the thing that I want to stress, and that I've learned from this, and I've noticed this over the last few years as I connect accounts to apps. I connect accounts to apps just to test them. Now I delete those connections when I'm done testing them. But you will see, as John described, if they're using an API, and particularly if it's using this OAuth, open authorization, a pop-up box and it's basically a web page. It's usually, though, a pop-up rather than covering the full screen. And it'll have your financial institution's URL. It's their website. And it'll ask you for your login information. Hopefully, you have two-factor authentication enabled. You should do that really on all accounts. And if you do, they'll walk you through that process too. So if you have you get a text message, after you enter your credentials, it'll ask you to put in the number. If you're using an authentication app, it'll ask you for that number. In some cases, you're using the financial institution's app. So you'll have to, open that up on your phone and say, yes, it's me. All of that is happening at your financial institution. It's being facilitated by Plaid or Yodlee or MX or Finicity, if I'm pronouncing it right, probably not. All the other account aggregators, Plaid isn't the only one. But the thing is you're never giving your login information to the account aggregator. And that to me seems like the gold standard. I mean, that's what I want to be able to do. If I see an account where I'm entering my credentials on Plaid's platform or Yodlee or whatever, again, I think it's reasonably safe. It's encrypted, but you have to recognize that your credentials are now going to be stored at this account aggregator. It's going to be encrypted, but it's going to be on this third party, this company's servers. And at the end of the day, you have to decide how comfortable you are with that. For me, I would be totally comfortable with a credit card, right? Because what's the worst case? I'd be less comfortable with a bank account, and I'd be less comfortable by an order of magnitude with an investment account. But again, at least all of the brokers, and for that matter, banks that I use, and they're all, the big ones, they all are using an API with open authorization, as far as I can tell, at least the ones that I use. And so it's really from what I can tell, no less secure than simply logging in directly with your broker. I suppose you do have to consider that your data is going through Plaid or Yodlee or wherever. That, I guess, you can't really help. Again, it's encrypted, but that's just part of, if you're not comfortable with that, you're just probably not comfortable using an app, at least using an app and linking your accounts to it. I suppose you could just do everything manually for some of them. Although, in my experience, that kind of defeats the purpose of using some of these apps, and also significantly reduces the functionality of the app. But again, we each have to make those decisions. So, my research, even before I did the interview today, I felt pretty comfortable connecting the apps. But, you guys may see it different. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on today's chat, but I do want to ask a question. Are you comfortable connecting accounts to apps? And we'll say yes, 100%. Yes, I'll say 50%. Like, yeah, I'm comfortable, but I don't know. Not really, but I do it. That might be some of you. Nope, never do it. I'm just curious how you guys feel about that. I'll let that run for a second while I look at all your questions. Fidelity, no, Fidelity, I get a question from Ethan. Fidelity uses, I'm pretty sure Fidelity uses an API. I know they do. I mean, I can double check while you guys are looking at, let's see here. How can I check this? I know they do. So let's find out. Let me see if I can get this. The answer appears to be yes. In fact, they've been maybe one of the more prickly institutions in terms of dealing with all this, the most restrictive, maybe that's better. Let's see. Since Fidelity began these efforts, nearly 100% of consumer-directed data sharing happens through Fidelity's application programming interface, enabling millions of customers to safely access and share their data. And that is, I can show you. I've got a button I can push. That's from Fidelity. So they do. Let's see. So 32% of you, 26% of you don't connect any apps or any financial accounts. 30% and 32% of you do it, but you're not really happy about it. That's amazing. That's over, goodness, I can do the math here. That's 58% of you. Wow. Okay. I would say I didn't even leave this as an option. I would say I'm yes, 75%. There's part of me, I'm okay. But, the other thing I'll say, and then we'll call it a day, security is a lot more than just what we've talked about, right? So do you have two-factor authentication for all of your accounts? Using an authentication app, Google has one, is safer than getting text messages, right? And using something like this, YubiKey, which you can tell I've not used this one since it's not out of the package. And I will be honest, I'm totally transparent. I have several of these sitting on my desk. I'm looking at them here, and I've not started using them, but that's going to change. Are you monitoring your accounts? Are you using whatever security features your accounts offer? For example, Fidelity has a feature where you can lock down your accounts from the account transfer process. And of course, you can turn that off and on. And you might say, well, wait a minute, if I can go in and turn that off or on, what good does it do me? If a hacker gets into my account, they can just go in and turn it off. Yes, but sometimes hackers can try to initiate a transfer without actually having access to your account. And that's where it can help you. But the point is, that's just one specific example. Are you taking advantage of all of the security features that each account offers? So it's a lot more than just, aggregating accounts and connecting them with apps. All right, so where'd we end up? About the same. 58% of you are either, I do it, but I'm not happy about it. That's 31%. 27% of you don't do it at all. 21% say, yeah, I do it. I'm about 50% happy about it. And 20% of you, 20% of you just must be living right. You don't have a care in the world. I'm doing it. I feel good about it. I like it. Well, I hope this has been useful and helpful. I can tell you it's been very helpful to me, not just the interview, but the research I did, because I think I understand account aggregation, pretty well. I'm not a computer programmer. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but the research helped me understand the different ways that accounts can be connected, how those differences are affected behind the scenes, which John talked about. So hopefully it's been helpful to you. The other thing it does is, for me, it's very selfish, but this is probably the single most frequently asked question I get. Is it safe to connect apps? And now I can just give everyone a link to this interview. So it's kind of saved me a lot of time. All right. Well, listen, I hope everyone has a great week. Remember, on Monday, the live show, and Monday evening, we're going to have Bill Bernstein. Do I have his book here handy? No, I think it's on my other desk. But Bill Bernstein will be joining us, 4 Pillars of Investing guy, and he's written actually a number of books. And so he'll be joining us for that live show. Apparently he runs Linux on his desktop, so he's going to be joining from like an iPad. I'm not quite sure how that will work. Yeah, but we'll find out. We'll do the best we can. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you. And I guess I have to end the show as I always do. Remember, until next time, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.